So what are we going to be talking about today? The digitally federated supply chain. And why does this matter? It matters for different reasons depending on your perspective in the supply chain, whether you're a shipper, a logistics service provider, a consultant, or a software provider. Uh, the biggest thing is that the world has changed in the last 5 years, and we need to do things faster. And we have to do those things like onboarding vendors at paces that those of us who have been doing this for 20 or 30 years never even imagined would have been possible. We also have to work with an explosion of software companies. Back 10 or 15 years ago, you were maybe integrating one new package a year. Now, venture capitalists are going out and supporting software companies and asking them to be more focused. And when companies become more focused in the software space, you need more of them to do the aggregate problem. It's rare companies now that are going and saying, I can go to an SAP or an Oracle and get everything I need for my supply chain. We're looking at companies just looking at narrow problems like AI for route optimization for your last mile deliveries. Well, there may be 50 or 100 of those companies in your supply chain, and we've got to be able to onboard those quickly. At the same time, the business is moving faster and new initiatives have to come in more quickly. And the IT part of the supply chain has to be able to support initiatives that may be coming up in a matter of hours. We want to, go after a new opportunity or support a new marketing campaign. And usually a lot of us come from a world where that would take months. I would predict that at some point in the future, that'll be minutes. Uh, and the last part is data. That there is a sustainable business model when your data is available to everyone. Innovation can come organically. You're not making large capital investments quite as often because people are finding ways to leverage the information that's available to them. And a lot of our role in the IT side of the supply chain now is to enable smart people to do smart things with the data that already exists out in the world. And if you're a logistics service provider, you need to be able to support this environment that's happening on the shipper side. You need to be able to integrate in an agile manner. 6 months is still far too common for a freight forwarder to get up and running fully with the supply chain platform of a customer, and that's just not the real world anymore. Things have to go quick. They may have to go piecemeal. They have to be improvised, and that will continue to change over time. And so the model of I'm going to implement my client and then never touch them again just won't exist in the new world. And being ready for transparency as well. This speaks a little bit to blockchain, but more so to milestones and to the fact that in the new federated supply chain, we see a world where your customers are now partners in each shipment, looking at the low level details that we used to be able to mask and we used to be able to hide inside of our systems and then get the KPI report out at the end of the month. When data is moving in real time, those business processes have to be much more agile so that they can adapt to each customer's unique needs. And that's really a different world. And what we see in what we're calling the digitally federated supply chain is the ability to share that data while still maintaining your core business processes. Before we dig into the real meat of it, we want to do a little bit of a history lesson here. The world started in our view of real supply chain automation with transactional data moving faster. So in the 90s and even in the 80s, we looked at things like the fax machine and scanners and email, and we can move PDFs around the world faster. That didn't change business processes per se, but it definitely made doing the thing we were doing with Federal Express or with the Postal Service, where we were mailing boxes of paper, go away, and things got a bit easier. And then in the early 2000s, EDI technology made another leap forward, even though it was, has existed since the 70s and really became more accessible to companies outside of the Fortune 100. And technologies like XML even accelerated that further. But what we saw was companies implementing large systems, large supply chain visibility platforms, large EDI systems, and funneling the data to a central database. That way they could do exception management, you could do visibility, you were getting out of spreadsheets, you were getting out of emails, and it really did improve all of our lives. And then things sort of paused in that space. And what we've seen in the last 10 years is a lot of processing of that data. So making decisions smarter, starting to apply things like machine learning and even simpler algorithms and business rules on top of these central databases so that the systems could be better at guiding people to make good decisions. What is about to change is what we call the federated model, and what is really about global alignment, which is breaking down the boundaries, taking the data that's right now coming in from the world and going to that central database and moving it out and saying, we're not going to have this concept of a logical firewall that blocks off our supply chain data from our vendors' supply chain data, and this big fat pipe that sits in between and makes those work together. We're going to be much more open, and things will be working over APIs that are sending lots of small bits of information, and there won't be the one database. There might be 30 or 50 systems involved in a particular transaction, which there are today, but we're not going to make the illusion that it all lands in one place and stays there. And by doing that, we're going to open up that data to our internal organizations and to our trusted providers so that they can use it for ways that we haven't even imagined yet. This creates a bit of a conflict. There's the central database concept, which is I'm housing information and you need to come to me as a gatekeeper and get permission and do an integration to get at that data. And the federated model, which says I'm making my data available and you choose how to use it, whether the you in that sentence is another department inside the company, or depending on your openness, a trading partner, or even the supply chain at large. Those are very different concepts. One is I am taking things in and aggregating it and holding it close. And the other is I'm exposing them carefully and with security, but I'm exposing them out in a way that other people can use this information without having to come through me as a gatekeeper. And when you do that, it makes the data much more accessible, and it allows your organization to innovate faster because people will find uses in marketing, people will find uses in other departments within the supply chain as a large to use that data to do things that they really could never get on your personal list or your project list to get it done if each one of them was going to be a $250,000 integration that was taking 6 months. So it makes you much, much more agile, but we have to, with the challenge of the next few years is how do we take those central databases, not throw them away, but instrument them and expose that data in a careful way so that people can use it to do more innovative things. So to recap the status quo, it's very cumbersome today. It's a very heavy project to get another supplier or all of your suppliers singing off the same sheet of music and into a supply chain visibility platform and into an EDI strategy. You know, even those of us who are good at bringing on suppliers, it's still more work than we'd like. And doing different, bringing on a new type of business. If you're today, you're in automotive and you want to expand into a different kind of manufacturing, that can be a huge lift and a ton of work, and will often, the limitations in the supply chain systems will cut off a business project that could have made a lot of money. Uh, and then that also creates all sorts of unintended consequences, because if all of these systems are relying on the central database and you change it, you may have 400 other connections that you have to think about and deal with. And it's very, very hard to change those core business processes. And the last piece of what we see as the problem with today's systems is they're really built to be one size fits all. This is the model of my supply chain, and you as a vendor of mine will adhere, and you as a customer of mine, I can provide you the data in maybe these few formats, but we don't really have the opportunity to truly innovate, because I'm bound to this model because if I change it, I'm going back to the last comment and I have to go change all my other systems. And it's very tight and it gets very static over time. The other thing we see today is silos. So we all kind of hate the word silo and we know silos are bad, but this is an example of concurrent projects that might be going on inside one company. And when we look at supply chain visibility initiatives and omni-channel and trade compliance and blockchain and all of these things, they're all about moving data around at some level and using the same data for different purposes. But in many companies, they're considered separate projects, separate systems, and it creates a lot of rework and it creates a situation where it's very hard to find what the truth is because different systems have modeled data in different ways. And we want to look at a world where you break down those silos and you look at the core data separately from the business processes and then make it available to these systems. So a little bit of a word of warning here. We're going to get into some real content now. A lot of webinars and a lot of presentations, we look at these high-minded concepts and we don't talk about how to do it. And so part of the value that Chain.io always likes to bring to our clients is that we get very granular and we get into how to actually get these things done in an organization. So we're going to move into that part of the presentation. So if we see the attendee list start to drop off as people get a little nervous with the content, we understand. We're recording all of this, and you'll get the video later if you want to go back through some of the detail. So there's a technical concept called microservices that has become very popular in the last few years, and your programmers probably know what this means, but it's an architectural style for how you build systems that we think has a large parallel to how you assemble your supply chain. And when I say assemble the supply chain, I'm thinking of all of the different parties, whether they're transportation providers, suppliers, carriers, customs agencies that are involved in your supply chain, and how those pieces come together and what the interfaces are between those pieces. And that is not a simple funnel down into a visibility tool. It's lots of messages going back and forth. Where systems get slow and where systems get hard to maintain from a very technical standpoint is when we have a lot of what we call coupling. So we have systems that must know exactly how the other system works, and the message formats are very static, and each system becomes bound until you have this big ball of string, or what we like to call in the programming world spaghetti code. Everything's twisted and you can't move any piece without moving the whole thing. Microservices is a style that says build each piece of your supply chain and define how it interacts with the rest and allow it to publish out the information that's important, the milestones, the data. So have your purchase order system as a simple example, issuing purchase orders into a repository where other systems can subscribe to them, but the purchase order system itself doesn't necessarily have to know that I have to hand the data off to the supply chain visibility platform. I have to hand the data off to the vendor. It puts it out in a secure and partitioned repository and let those other systems subscribe and listen for that information. It's a little bit of a subtle distinction, but what it does when you push information out in one format is it allows you to continue to improve and add to that format without having to go back and touch all of the other systems that are involved and all of the other companies that are involved. So you have a purchase order today and you don't put an expected delivery date on it. And you want to add that information instead of going back and having every system reprogram. You add the information to the common published message, and all the systems that need that new information can go make modifications and subscribe to that message. And the ones that don't can move on and stay where they are. So it's a little bit of a subtle distinction here, but what it allows you to do is add new systems quickly because you say, this is where the information is, go and get it. And it allows you to drop systems out by just canceling their subscriptions and create this world where you have lots of little pieces that are coordinating, sort of like those really cool drone demos, as opposed to one large system where if you touch everything, or touch anything, the whole system falls apart. We see the federated supply chain as taking those same principles and applying it not only at the software level, but also at the business level. So saying, this is how I work as a shipper, for example, with a freight forwarder. And this is the messages we put out, and they're available. So when we suddenly need to go into a new geography, instead of doing a large onboarding project with the forwarder, we're able to say, here's the messages, here's how we put the information out, and you just go ahead and subscribe and ingest that information. And as long as you can give us these 3 messages back into this queue, we can work together much more quickly, and we don't have to change our internal systems to deal with you. And so if you're a forwarder or logistics provider who's listening, this is where you need to get really good, is being able to ingest that information in different formats for different clients, and in your world, get it down into one sanitized, this is how we see a booking working, or this is how we see an advanced shipment notice coming into our facility. But I'll have a perimeter layer where you can subscribe to all these different messages and get them into your environment in one message that you publish into your internal messaging layer. What does this do for us? The biggest thing this does for us is it allows us to add new things quickly and shut down old things quickly. A good example is a project I worked on a few years ago when the Greek yogurt thing got really popular, and we had a large food and beverage company who wanted to get on top of this yogurt craze, and they were building a factory or a manufacturing facility to make the yogurt here in the States. In the meantime, they needed to import the yogurt, and that's a perishable product, and it's, a pretty high risk thing to stand up that whole supply chain. But they knew if they didn't do it right then and there, they they were going to miss the opportunity. They couldn't wait the year for the entire manufacturing supply chain to be built in the US. What they had to do was go into their SAP environment and go into their large warehouse management system and get all these modifications done, and it took a long time. In a federated supply chain, what they should have been able to do is say, I'm going to choose a very lightweight supply chain visibility platform, subscribe it to my message queue that I have today, get a lightweight warehouse management system, and just run this thing sort of on the side, but using the same message type, so that as we decide this is a real business and it's not a fad, we can fold that in and move it into our main environment much more quickly, because we're still using the same common messages, but they can react faster and use tools that are sometimes too lightweight to use in a large enterprise. And same thing if you're a logistics service provider, that you want to be that tool. You want to be the company that can plug in very quickly, get hooked into that new trend or that new fad product that the company's trying, and potentially you're there forever, but you're the one who made it easy on them, because you have an environment that allows that very quick uh, plugging in and just doing the minimum viable thing to get that one project done. And what we're seeing with the way venture capital is being spent in our space on software right now is that a lot of these smaller, very narrowly focused software companies can provide a lot of value if you have a mechanism for them to plug into your environment quickly, but they will not be able to provide value if it's going to take you a year to onboard a new software package, because you will not have the ROI to do the pilot or the proof of concept that you need to do with them, which maybe should only take 60 days, because you can't spend a year to do a 60-day test, which is where a lot of the companies that we work with are currently struggling to take advantage of new technology. Is it's too hard to get into the pilot, and this puts that in a new perspective for them. There was a term in the early 2000s called service-oriented architecture that really made the same promises. It said, we're going to put this big pipe in the middle of a company, and we're going to make a department, and that department is going to be the service-oriented architects, and they are going to say these are all the messages that go into the pipe, and everyone's going to be able to connect to it, and it's going to glue our whole company together, and everything's going to be perfect, and everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows, and nobody will ever have to worry about what another department's doing ever again. It didn't work. It looks very, very similar to microservices. It's not exactly the same thing. Where it is the same is the principle. The principle of having a common message pipe, having an area where you can put your data and very quickly connect your customers, your suppliers, and get them all interacting on that data as well as your internal systems is still the right idea. The reason that service-oriented architecture failed 10 or 15 years ago is the governance side. It was a central department who was dictating to the rest of the company, this is the message that we will use. These are the formats. And if you want to do something innovative, you need to come to us, and we will decide whether it's innovative in the right way. And we will decide whether we have the time and the budget to innovate with you. And if not, we will be the bottleneck and you won't get your innovation done. That, when you say it that way, obviously sounds really bad. We've all learned a lot since then, but that was sort of the downstream effect of what happened with service-oriented architecture. What happens with microservices is we say there is no central department. Every department is responsible for publishing the messages and documenting them and making them available to the appropriate parties. And we sort of loosen the reins on formats and all of these low-level technical things that don't really have to be perfect. What that does is it frees up everyone to innovate, to add new functionality, to turn off functionality in a responsible way. And it moves that security and governance question down a layer to the data to say, if you want to push data out, so if I'm a freight forwarder and I want to make messaging available to my customers, I have to make sure that if that messaging is going to include client identifying data, I can only put it into this message queue. And if it is just very generic data on, say, location of ships, I can put it in a more public place and I can allow more people to subscribe to it. And those rules become rules that each department is responsible for following, and there's still some governance to make sure they're happening, but we're not dictating, we're not doing the nanny state of one central department saying, no, you can't try that. We're opening it up. And this is something that Amazon has done an incredibly good job at. And it's really one of their core principles is this idea that these small teams can try things, can experiment, can get that data out there. And some of those things we never hear about because they fail miserably, and that's okay. And many of them become really useful innovations that probably would have died somewhere in a company where you have to go through 4 layers of bureaucracy before you can even write a statement of work to begin considering getting a budget to get on a list to do something in a year. So that's really where this comes in and where it's a little bit different than the way we've tried it in the past. So how do we do it? What's the secret here to making this work? Not starting with traditional requirements gathering. So this is a little bit of a scary statement, but requirements gathering, the way we do it in companies, where we go to the business or where the business comes to IT and says, I have this problem, or I had this problem yesterday, and this is my pain, and go solve for my pain, allows you to solve the problems that you're currently experiencing or the problems that you were just experiencing 5 minutes or 5 days ago. But it doesn't really allow you to solve the problems that you're going to experience that you don't know about yet. And the companies that do it really well sometimes can say, you know, I have a smart person who can tell me this is the problem we're going to have at the next level of growth, but you still can't solve for the unknowns that are out there in the future, or the big shift in your business that the COO comes down with 2 days after you finish the project that changes everything. What we do instead is we build for flexibility. So we say, get your data out into the world at the core data level, and don't worry as much at the beginning about how it's going to be used, and then start using it. Then go back to requirements gathering and say, okay, of this data that is now out there, how can I use it to solve this problem? But don't skip that first step. So that's what we call the foundation step. So we're not going to go through every word on every one of these next few slides, but this will all be available after the conference here. But the foundation steps about getting at the data, saying what is the data that runs my business? If I'm an apparel company, what is that core data about style, color, size? If I'm a food company, where do I house my FDA regulations? What are all of those elements, right? If I'm a freight forwarder, where do I house my agent relationship information? Where do I house, the actual transactional information about a shipment? And then inside of that, what pieces of that data are core and what are secondary? Once we have that model, so if we take something simple like an invoice, we know that all of our invoices always have an invoice number and an invoice date and payment terms and an amount. And some of our invoices have things like customer charge code on it, which might be secondary data. Once we have that, we can now model, this is what an invoice looks like in our company. And we can turn that into an event that says, every time we issue an invoice, there's going to be a message out on our network. So systems that want to use our invoices for AI need to subscribe to this messages. Systems that need to distribute our invoices to our clients can subscribe to that same message. And the AI one might only be looking at the core data, and the distribution one may need to look at all of that secondary data. So that's sort of the idea of what we're getting at here, of defining data and then going to the next step of listing the problems you have and how you're going to use that data to coordinate amongst all of your systems. We do a very bad job as an industry today of separating data from business process and saying, let's build our systems to put data into the world and then apply business processes. We say, what business process do I need to fix, right? I need to fix outbound distribution is inefficient. We're choosing the wrong carriers. And then I say, what data do I need? That's a backwards process that leads to what we had a few slides back, and I'll step back here, of each of these business processes and each of these problems going after the same data in different ways, which builds this very rigid spaghetti system that we were talking about. We have a little bit more detail here, and we'll put this out also for all of you in the follow-up, or if you want to pause the video if you're watching this later, on sort of the definitions of each of these. And we're not going to dive totally into those today, so feel free to take your time later. What we do want to call out, though, is security. This idea of an open world, this idea of we're publishing data does great on a stage at a trade show. But then you have to think about data security. You have to think about GDPR. You have to think about personally identifiable information. You have to think about trade secrets and who's going to get that data and what are they going to do with it. What we believe is that you model those problems at the data element, not at the business process. It's not as much about who can subscribe to my order, though that is important, as to what are the elements in that order and which systems are allowed to subscribe to which elements, and then building your messages so that you have those tiers, right? So going back to our example of the yogurt company, they may say data around how much is moving is data that our entire freight community needs to be aware of. How many orders and what is and what are they moving? The prices that we're paying for the raw materials and the prices that we're paying with everybody else in that supply chain is much more secure data. And we're going to be putting that messaging on a much more restricted queue that can only be subscribed to by the people we trust. So even internally, our accounting department's going to get the pricing information. Our BI department might get the pricing, but there is no reason that our supply chain managers who are just doing the day-to-day transportation execution, they do not need to know how much we paid for that product, whereas the customs department may need to know it. And you're able to segment that out at that data level, which then frees you up to, once you know you have messages in a certain security tier, let anyone who's allowed to have messaging at that tier subscribe to that message and go do an innovative project where someone in a department says, hey, if I could subscribe to all that transportation information, I can run that into this new AI system we want to try and see if we can figure out a faster way to get that product to market. What does this look like, and what does it look like in the Chain.io world? For us, it looks like having lots of systems around this central pipe, and whether you're using us or whether you're not using us, the principles here remain the same, which is we build a single pipe to each system for each of these data types, right? So a pipe for that secure purchase order and a pipe for the insecure purchase order, a pipe out to each customer where they can then go and subscribe and hook into that pipe to get the information about the product that's on the way to them, or same thing on a vendor side. And then the pipes off to the lower level services, these AI platforms, these shipment tracking platforms, all of these other things that float around in the world, a freight audit and pay company. And instead of building one-off connections, so saying you have your WMS has to talk to 18 systems, your WMS talks to this central cloud and pushes the message. And sometimes you may have an AI system that needs to subscribe to 5 or 6 messages, and that's still a lighter weight thing than building 5 or 6 mods into 5 or 6 of those in-house systems so that you can get one big fat AI message out to that AI service. Push that problem out to this central platform and let it reassemble these messages into useful manners. And that is not something that's specific to us. We're very proud of how well we do it, but it is certainly a principle that can be applied using almost any integration platform. What are the core takeaways here? The first takeaway is thinking about your visibility as a combination of that platform and the data, right? So you still need, from a supply chain visibility standpoint, a tool, right? There's no argument whether that tool is Excel or whether it's a $500,000 system or a multi-million-dollar system. You still need visibility and a place for people to act. What we have made mistakes in the past is binding that together with the data distribution. And we're saying those two things should be pulled apart. That you have your visibility system, and it is a subscriber to these messages, but its database is not the place where you host that information, because then it is very expensive comparatively to go make modifications to get that data out, to push it to people, to add new data sources that may not be in the business model of that visibility provider's systems. So separate those two things. And then the second is approach that data strategy as an independent concept. So it is not, today I'm having pain because what my supplier says they're sending me is different than what I receive. What data do I need to go solve that problem? It's, what does my supply chain look like from a data standpoint, or what should it look like? What are the core elements that are important to me in a shipment? What are the core elements that are important to me in a purchase order, in a warehouse receipt? And then how do I use those to solve that problem? So it's a reversal of the way that we think about these core issues. The third one here is important. Wrap your existing applications. This is not a model of the world that says throw away your existing systems. Don't go spend $1 million or $10 million or $50 million throwing away all your systems to get systems that are microservices friendly or blockchain friendly or AI friendly. Take your existing systems, figure out how to get the data out, and then use lightweight tools to augment your existing systems with all of these great products that are being built today. And this is really the core change that the cloud has brought to our industry, is the ability to say, I'm going to, for the next year, subscribe to this freight optimization tool because we have a specific problem now, and I'm probably going to cancel them in a year because that problem is going to be a different problem. And if you can do that quickly by wrapping all of your heavy systems you have today in these lightweight interfaces and adding these tools, you can do incredible things that you can't do if every time you do that, it's go back to my very limited SAP team or my very limited customization resources at my TMS provider and ask them for a modification to go hook to that AI tool. It just doesn't work. It's what's slowing us all down. And the last piece here, learn from that governance fiasco. Do not build another heavyweight governance process. Do the minimum you need to do to make sure your data is secure and that it is that you've created reasonable categories of data that people can subscribe to, and stop. If you have 50 consultants coming in, or depending on your scale, even 2 consultants coming in to kind of tell you how they're going to build this thing in this department, you're going right back down the path that we all went down 15 years ago. And that is the first indicator that you are headed down the wrong path, is you're adding layers of governance. This is about stripping them, making the data available in a responsible way, and giving it to your clients in a way where they can consume it and use it for creative things, or your vendors, or whatever trading partners. And it's really up to each company and your company's culture as to how much data and where those boundaries are. And it's an excellent opportunity for companies to differentiate themselves in different ways, both on the service provider and the shipper side, to say, we want to be the really open company, or we want to be the company that doesn't share a lot, but provides a different kind of service because of that. And these are kind of executive conversations that you have at the beginning, and then apply them down to your data strategy. And lastly, we're here to help. One of the things that we're really passionate about here at Chain.io is how to take all of even these high-minded concepts and apply them to real systems. And so we're always open to having these conversations, and we certainly aren't the kind of company that has to turn on the meter right away. So if anybody wants to reach out to us, we are more than welcome to just having conversations and talking this out. And we're going to be at a number of trade shows over the next year, so we look forward to seeing you, whether it's just in the first quarter. We have things coming up in Singapore with the WCA. We'll be at Air Cargo. I believe we'll be at NRF. So we're looking forward to continuing the conversation through the whole industry. Thank you, everyone, so much for your time. And we don't have any questions right now in the Q&A, so we're going to stop right now. We'll send you all the follow-up with the white paper and the links to this recording, and look forward to talking to you all soon. Thank you very much.